One book, one extraordinary life. 48 chapters of saints, science, and the search for God.
I'm Kai.
And I'm Maya.
And this is our take on Autobiography of a Yogi, chapter by chapter.
You are the first Westerner, Dick, ever to enter that shrine. Many others have tried in vain.
Chapter 41, An Idyll in South India. We're arriving in a landscape Yogananda rarely describes this way before. Not miracles, not drama, just the beauty of the place itself. The green, the light, the way everything seems to breathe with its own divinity.
They've just left the Chamundi temple in the hills overlooking Mysore. It's November 1935. Yogananda and his companion Dick Wright are guests of the state of Mysore, invited by the Maharaja himself. And they're spending the whole month there, touring the landscape, visiting sacred sites, moving through what feels like the living heart of India. You know, it's one of the last extended journeys Yogananda will take with Sri Yukteswar before everything transforms.
Dick Wright is keeping a travel diary, and he describes the landscape in this almost ecstatic way. He writes about brilliantly green rice fields, varied by tasseled sugarcane patches, nestled at the protective foot of rocky hills. The beauty is relentless. And then he gets lyrical about the sunset, how the colors shift and blend. He talks about God taking all the colors in his kit and giving them one mighty kaleidoscopic toss into the heavens. That's the mood here. Not frantic seeking, not the urgency we felt in earlier chapters, just being present to something alive and breathing and full of grace.
The Maharaja is remarkable. H. Sri Krishna Raja Wadiyar IV is a model prince, intelligent, genuinely devoted to his people. He's gathered thousands of citizens to hear Yogananda speak. The National High School, the Intermediate College, the University Medical School, the town hall where over 3,000 persons had assembled. And Yogananda describes the applause as loudest when he talks about the mutual benefits that could flow from exchange of the best features between East and West. He's bridging worlds even then. The East has spiritual depth, the West has technical genius. What if they learn from each other?
But here's the thing that interests me. The chapter isn't really about the Maharaja, or the crowds, or even the formal talks. It's about the touring, the being present to a landscape, to a culture, to people living their ordinary lives within an extraordinary spiritual context. Dick and Yogananda ride in a bus over smooth dirt roads at sunset. They visit the Krishna Raja Sagar Gam, 12 miles outside of Mysore. They ride elephants through the landscape. They explore temples and archaeological sites.
Dick describes the elephant ride as this extraordinary privilege. You climb a ladder to the howdah, the cushioned saddle, and then you're elevated above the landscape, moving, swaying, and floating through space while hanging on for dear life. He's completely alive. That's what strikes him. The total presence to the moment. The awareness that he's been given something most Westerners never experience. Not just the physical sensation, the spiritual gravity of it. To be in a place where elephants and temples and ancient wisdom exist side by side.
And Yogananda teaches through all of it. Through the landscape itself. Sri Yukteswar used to say that India's living spiritual heritage isn't hidden in books or in the past. It's walking among ordinary people, in temples, in shrines, in the consciousness of saints living right now. And Yogananda's noticing it, pointing it out to Dick. This is South India, not a museum, a living reality. The sacred geography that produces saints, the cultural container that supports seeking.
Yogananda describes southern India with this historian's precision. He talks about how it's rich with historical and archaeological remains. To the north of Mysore is the largest native state in India, Hyderabad, a picturesque plateau cut by the mighty Godavari River. There are the Nilgiri Mountains, the Blue Mountains, other regions with barren hills of limestone or granite. And then he goes deeper. He talks about the temples at Ellora and Ajanta, the rock-sculptured caves, the Kailasa temple that possesses carved figures of gods and men and beasts in stupendous proportions. He's not just listing monuments, he's pointing at the consciousness that built them, centuries of devotion carved into stone.
Wait, and then there's this whole section on King Asoka and ancient Indian wisdom. Yogananda quotes this inscription from a rock memorial. It was engraved so that sons and grandsons would understand that conquest by the sword isn't true conquest, that true conquest is of religion, that violence and destruction have no value. Only the conquest of religion deserves the name of conquest. And Yogananda is saying, look, this is the consciousness that created the civilization. This is what values what human beings should strive for.
Then there's Sadasiva, the yogi saint who appears in these southern stories. And the story is extraordinary. A Mohammedan warrior challenges him, wants to test his power. The warrior deals a savage sword thrust at Sadasiva, whose arm was severed. The master departed unconcernedly. The warrior was overcome with remorse and followed him, and Sadasiva quietly inserted his arm into the bleeding stump. When the warrior asked for spiritual instruction, Sadasiva wrote with his finger on the sand, "Do not do what you want, and then you may do what you like."
Okay, so that needs unpacking, right? The teaching is subtle but total. Do not do what you want means don't act from impulse, from ego desire, from the unconscious machinery of the personality. Once you've mastered that, once you've developed will in the Yogananda sense, then you can do what you like, because your desires will be in perfect harmony with cosmic law. Your actions will flow from a consciousness that's united with God's consciousness. The warrior humbled by that reply understands, the greatest power isn't the power to destroy, it's the power to transcend the ego that wants to destroy.
And that brings us to Anandamoyi Ma. Yogananda describes her as the extraordinary woman saint. And here's the thing, she's not like anyone else we've encountered in this book. She's not a teacher's teacher like Sri Yukteswar. She's not a householder saint performing miracles within the world like Lahiri Mahasaya. She's her own category entirely, a woman in ecstatic communion with God, walking the world as a bridge between the divine and the human.
What strikes me about her is the accessibility. Yogananda speaks of her miracles and her ecstatic states, but what comes through is that she's not distant. She's not performing spirituality. She's present in a way that's almost disarming. Someone whose consciousness has merged so completely with the infinite that miracles seem like the natural overflow of that union. She's available. Saints in India aren't hidden away. They're recognized and honored and accessible to those who have eyes to see them.
The teaching in this chapter lives inside the story of the journey, not stated as doctrine. Here's the thing. Saints walk among ordinary people in India, not sequestered, not locked away in mountain caves. Some of them are women, some of them are in the marketplace, some of them are accessible to those who recognize them. Consciousness recognizes itself when it encounters itself. That's the teaching, not a belief system, a lived demonstration. When Yogananda meets Anandamoyi Ma, that meeting itself is the transmission, the consciousness speaking to consciousness directly.
And the landscape has the same quality. Yogananda describes the dam with its colored fountains playing on geyser-like fountains, gorgeous blue waterfalls, arresting red cataracts, green and yellow sprays, elephants spouting water. It's like nature and human engineering have collaborated to create a single expression of beauty. And his point is this: consciousness can express itself endlessly, through matter, through engineering, through art, through the simple joy of beauty for its own sake. That's the universe's nature. That's our nature too if we could just recognize it. The universe isn't made of dead matter somehow animated by consciousness stuck on top. The rocks are conscious, the water is conscious, the light playing on the water is conscious. All of it is different frequencies of the same fundamental consciousness expressing itself, and human beings have the capacity to recognize that and express it as beauty.
There's also this section on the Maharaja's philosophy about cows. And I know that might seem tangential, but it's actually at the heart of the teaching. The Maharaja explains that the cow represents man's relationship with all life. She gave him milk, she gave him strength for agriculture, she gave milk without requiring he kill her. And therefore, her protection is the protection of the whole of creation. Protection means recognizing your responsibility to the helpless, to the innocent, to all forms of life.
Seriously? It's not sentimental. It's actually a teaching about consciousness. How you treat the least among creation, the most defenseless, reveals your inner state. Someone established in the recognition that consciousness appears in all forms will naturally protect all forms. It flows from the unity they've realized. So the Maharaja's protection of cows isn't a rule imposed from outside. It's the expression of a consciousness that recognizes the sacred in every creature. The Maharaja says the cow is a poem of pity. One reads pity in the gentle animal. She is the second mother to millions of mankind. Protect the cow and you're protecting the whole of creation. Protect the defenseless and you're protecting the part of God that dwells in all beings.
Yogananda also mentions the Kumbh Mela, one of the largest spiritual gatherings on earth, millions of pilgrims assembling at sacred rivers at specific times determined by astrological calculation, all seeking the same thing: initiation, blessing, the recognition of their own divinity. And Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar are moving through a landscape where such gatherings happen naturally, where the entire culture supports seeking, where a saint can be fully alive in the world and completely surrendered to the infinite simultaneously. This is what's so remarkable about India. The sacred and the ordinary exist side by side. The village woman bathing in the Ganges, the yogi saint in his cave, the Maharaja performing his duties, the pilgrim traveling hundreds of miles to touch sacred water. They're all part of the same fabric, the same recognition that consciousness is central to life.
The bittersweet quality running through this chapter is impossible to miss. This is one of the last times Yogananda will travel with Sri Yukteswar in this way. Extended time, presence, the guru still fully embodied, still available in the world. Yogananda doesn't say that explicitly, but it resonates underneath every description. He's treasuring the moment even as he's living it. He knows, maybe not consciously, that something is about to change forever. The guru's body is wearing. The work is nearly complete. This month in South India is a gift, a final offering of presents before the transition comes.
And then there's this remarkable interaction with a woman named Mirabai. She's a follower of Gandhi, doing rural reconstruction work in the villages, teaching simple hygiene to people who are illiterate. She came to India in 1925 and told Yogananda, "I felt that I came home. I would never return to my old life and old interests." And Yogananda notices her, the genuine spirituality expressing itself not as ecstasy or miracles, but as service, as work, as love made practical. The bodhisattva impulse manifests through an Englishwoman dedicating her life to the poor. She has a strong, calm face lit with enthusiasm. She talks about going out every morning at 5 o'clock to serve the villagers, to clean their latrines, to teach them simple skills. Not from pity, from a recognition that these are human beings worthy of dignity and basic care. That's the teaching too, that consciousness expressing itself through the humble service of one human being to another.
Hold on, the story of the Mohammedan chieftain and Sadasiva is still sitting with me. The warrior's arm is severed, right? And Sadasiva doesn't react with fear or pain, he just quietly puts his arm back where it belongs. The calmness of it, the absolute non-resistance. And then, when the warrior desperately wants spiritual instruction, Sadasiva writes on the sand, "Do not do what you want, and then you may do what you like." That's karma. That's self-mastery. That's what's possible when the consciousness has been liberated from the tyranny of desire. Because most of us are slaves to our impulses. We want something and we do it without thinking. We're driven by unconscious patterns. But a saint, someone who's realized the truth, has absolute freedom. They do what they like because they've transcended the ego that has selfish wants.
The teaching is woven through everything in this chapter, through Sadasiva's story, through the Maharaja's dignity, through Ananda Mo'i Ma's accessibility, through Mirabai's service, through Dick Wright's sense of privilege at touching the hand of a civilization that knows what consciousness is. The universe is consciousness appearing in form. Matter is conscious. The elephant is consciousness. The river is consciousness. The woman doing service is consciousness. The saint is consciousness. And all of it is one consciousness appearing as multiplicity.
The Vedantic philosophy comes through too. Yogananda emphasizes that consciousness is fundamental, not secondary. Matter is consciousness expressing itself. The universe isn't physical with consciousness somehow added on top. It's consciousness appearing as physicality. And the practices of Kriya Yoga are the means by which that recognition can become direct and reproducible and scientific. Not a belief, not a philosophy, a technique that anyone can practice and verify for themselves through their own experience.
But what keeps returning to me is the quality of ease in this chapter. Even though we're seeing it partly through Dick Wright's eyes, through quoted passages and anecdotes, you feel the joy, the naturalness, the way these beings, Sri Yukteswar and Yogananda, are at home in the world and utterly beyond it simultaneously. They're traveling, meeting people, riding elephants, speaking to thousands. They're engaged with India. They're present to beauty. They're honoring saints and Mahabhajas and simple people. They're eating and walking and sleeping. They're fully alive in the world, and yet they're established in a consciousness that nothing can shake. That's the paradox. That's what freedom looks like when it's embodied.
Yeah. And that's actually the teaching made visible, not as an idea, but as lived reality. Samadhi, absorption in infinite consciousness. And yet the body moves, the voice speaks, the hand reaches out and blesses people, the consciousness touches people. It's not a contradiction, it's the highest harmony, the human fulfilling its deepest potential. Consciousness recognizing itself, expressing itself, blessing itself through a human form that has become completely transparent.
Southern India was the perfect setting for this understanding. The temples, the saints, the sacred geography, the culture that's built on the recognition that consciousness is fundamental. And Yogananda treasures it. Even though the chapter is framed loosely, conversationally, there's a preciousness to it. This is one of the last times with the guru in this way. Not stated, but if you're paying attention, you feel it. The guru, the student, the landscape, the journey, all of it held lightly. All of it recognized as the play of consciousness in time. The chapter is called An Idyll in South India. An idyll, a peaceful interlude, a moment outside of time where beauty and presence and teaching all merge into one seamless experience. And Yogananda is giving us something here, not just information about South India, a taste of what it means to live awake, to see consciousness everywhere,
to move through the world with devotion and wisdom both.
The poetry of the descriptions matters too, not just in Wright's accounts, but in what Yogananda chooses to include. The Taj Mahal, that dream in marble, the dam's fountains, King Asoka's wisdom about true conquest being the conquest of religion, the truth that sainthood belongs to the entire world, that all genuine paths lead to the same truth, that consciousness recognizes consciousness, and in that recognition, all the boundaries of nation and sect and time collapse like walls made of paper. These aren't random digressions. They're Yogananda saying, look at what India teaches. Look at the civilization built on these principles. Look at what's possible when a culture recognizes that consciousness is central.
There's also this feeling that the teaching is no longer needing to be stated. Yogananda is showing us, through the quality of his presence in the world, how to be in a temple with reverence, how to acknowledge beauty without clinging to it, how to honor a saint without losing yourself, how to meet a warrior with compassion, how to recognize consciousness in an elephant and a dam and a woman doing service, how to move through the world awake and free and alive to every moment. That's what this chapter demonstrates. Not what it says, what it shows. And that's the highest teaching, not information, a lived example that transforms anyone who receives it.
And the women appear repeatedly, not as passive observers. Anandamoyi Ma in her ecstatic communion with God, Mirabai in her service to the poor, the Maharaja's wife Kastura Bai mentioned in the Gandhi chapter we read about before, the woman saint recognized and honored. In a culture that sometimes marginalizes the feminine, Yogananda makes sure to show us that the highest realization appears in female form too, that consciousness has no gender, that awakening doesn't discriminate.
So what's coming next is the heavy chapter, the last days with Sri Yukteswar at the Seramport Hermitage. We'll see the guru slip away. We'll feel the loss, even though we know from the teaching that consciousness cannot be born or die. But for now, for this episode, we're in the idyll. That's the chapter's title, the idyll, a simple description of peaceful happiness, a place and time suspended from the ordinary demands of the world. But the teaching is alive here, the highest truth expressed as the simplest joy, presence, beauty, consciousness playing with itself.
See you next time.
See you next time.